Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Florida Sound Archive podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Kaiser, and for today's episode, I have on with me a very special guest. He has been in bands such as Dore Soul, the C60s, and he's also been pretty active his entire career. We got Carey Peak on the podcast today. Carey, how are you?
Hey, hey, how you doing?
I'm doing
Good.
fantastic. It's great to have you on. Finally, we've been waiting for this episode. I know we kind of scheduled this a little bit ago, and we're finally here. So excited for you to tell your story as you have been around the South Florida music scene for quite a while.
Yes, I have. I definitely have some stories to tell, that's for sure.
We're going to go back and we're going to tell some of those stories and perhaps why that was such a remarkable period for music, especially in the South Florida scene. So let's go back to your early beginnings, Carey. So where'd you grow up?
I was born in Lubbock, Texas. Um, and a lot of people might not know Lubbock is famous for Buddy Holly. Um, there's a huge statue of Buddy Holly in downtown Lubbock. Um, and my father in seventh grade was walking home from school and he heard this kid talking about how he played the banjo and my dad played the mandolin, and he runs up to him and he's like, hey, I play the mandolin, you play the banjo. And that kid was Buddy Holly. And my grandfather at the time had a record player that you could buy a blank wax record and record onto the record. And they went over to my grandfather's house, and the very first recordings of Buddy Holly were in my grandfather's living room of my dad and Buddy Holly playing old bluegrass songs, like 12, 13 years old. And throughout middle school and high school, they were best friends. And my dad's high school yearbooks, the back spine of the yearbook is normally the one you save for your best friend. And the back spine of all my dad's yearbooks, Buddy wrote like a whole page to my dad. So Buddy's very first bands playing in the skating rinks in Lubbock, this was 1953, 54. My parents were old when they had me. My parents were like 40 when I was born. So, but those first bands, my dad played in those bands with Buddy. And this was the beginning of rock and roll, when rock and roll is a very controversial form of music, especially in West Texas.
Right.
So
Do you have siblings too?
I have four older sisters. And another interesting fact, my mother is from Paris, France. My mother is about as French as you can get. But the influence that my mother brought, my mother was raised on classical music, Django Reinhardt, like French jazz. And my dad's coming from, his roots were definitely in early rock and roll, blues, bluegrass. So I grew up in a pretty eclectic household as far as like styles of music. So, and I think that definitely influenced me and the styles of music I ended up getting into as I got older.
I can imagine. And especially as you moved around. So did you go from Texas to Florida or was there other locations in between that move?
There was a quick stop in Dallas, which was a much bigger area, a metropolitan area. And then my dad's job moved us to Fort Lauderdale. And my mom was definitely not a huge fan of Lubbock, Texas. For her to go from Paris, France to Lubbock was like culture shock. So when we got to South Florida and she saw the diversity, she immediately met ladies at work and church that were from like Europe, and so she loved it. She took to it like a fish to water.
What year was this around?
This was 1980, and I was 11 years old. And it's funny because when I first got to South Florida, right away the kids made fun of me because I had a Southern accent. But it's like I grew up in a house with a mother who had a French accent. She'd get on the phone and speak French. My dad could turn his accent on and off. Like if he got on a business call, you couldn't tell where he was from. So I came home from school and I was like, I don't want to talk like this anymore. And my mom was like, well, she was like, well, just, like the people on the news, they don't have any accent. And so that was like the first time I realized that I could like imitate. And so I would imitate myself without an accent. And like right away, like I lost my accent. So I don't know how that relates to like songwriting, but I guess in a way it's kind of like enunciating things.
Sure.
But from there, my family was kind of religious when I was young. So of course there was that, like hard rock was like the devil's music, and which is kind of ironic because my dad, I was allowed to listen to like Little Richard, Elvis, Chuck Berry, which, come on, I mean, when you talk about the subject matter of those songs. But then when it came to things like Kiss or Black Sabbath or things like that, it was like, oh, that's the devil's music. And I remember being a little kid and walking through the mall, and Kiss Alive 2 had just come out. And I know I heard you talk about this on one of your other podcasts, but it was like the glass windows of the mall like had huge pictures of like Gene Simmons spitting blood and Ace Frehley like shooting fire out of his guitar. And I was like, wow, look at it. And my mom was like, no, this is the devil's music. Come on. And it just made me want it more,
Right. I can imagine. What mall did you frequent a lot back in that time period?
I would say if you want to talk about real malls, because some of the malls, the Galleria in Sunrise and Bayview, but we lived kind of like halfway in between the Galleria and Lakes Mall in Lauderdale Lakes. I don't know. I know you're a Coral Springs
I
guy.
I I had a when I was in middle school, my bus route passed the Lakes Mall.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. So while we're on that subject, I lived in Lauderdale Lakes, commercial in 441. Went to Boyd Anderson High School, Boyd Anderson Cobras. But I do remember when they opened the Coral Springs Mall, because it was like, oh, they got a new mall in Coral Springs.
Right.
I think it was like early 80s, if I'm
It
not
was.
mistaken.
It was. Yeah. Early
But
80s. Yeah.
but then I remember me and my sister, we discovered the Broward Mall. We take the bus to the Broward Mall. That was back when kids would just get on the bus, I mean, no big deal.
Sure.
So
Were there music stores you were going to at the mall back then you can remember?
I would say at that age, it was just whatever store was in the mall. I know in Lakes Mall there was Sid's Records and Tapes. And Sid's Records and Tapes was pretty cool because they had a lot of imports, but I didn't know any different because I hadn't really bought my own. At 11 years old, I wasn't really like buying my own music yet. It's funny though, because when I think back to the very first like little 7-inch singles I bought, I was talking to my friend the other day, and it was the very first one I bought was "It's Still Rock and Roll to Me" by Billy Joel. I was just like, oh, it's such a cool song. And then I know it's so cheesy, but the song "Shining Star," it was like, "You are my shining star." It was like a doo-wop song. But I can't remember the music store in the Galleria. Um, I know the the Coral Springs Mall had Camelot, which when I was 18, I actually worked at the Camelot in Coral Springs Mall.
What was that experience like?
That was pretty interesting. It's funny because you'd be in the back like unloading like brand new cassettes, and you'd have the list of the new releases that were coming out that week. And there was a girl who worked there, and she right away showed me, she's like, you see this box, we're going to put this in the dumpster. And and I'm going to put these three cassettes. So right away I realized, like, if there was something I wanted, we just stick it in the box and take the boxes out to the dumpster and then drive around the back.
Right.
So bad.
You had your
But
method to take some of the tapes you wanted to bring home with you, right?
it's so bad. But I would say the my first experience at really starting to listen to music that I wasn't supposed to listen to was when I got a Walkman, which I would say I was like 12 years old, and then I started dialing in the radio stations, and I was like, oh, I don't think I'm supposed to be listening to this station. So
What
that's when I started to get exposed to like hard rock, like Van Halen, like stuff like that.
what
Um,
station was that you were tuning into that was playing that kind of music?
there was a station that went off the airwaves, I think, in like 82, 83, and it was K102. And I don't know if you remember K102.
No, I was too young. However, I do have a compilation that K102 put out of a lot of local bands, and I'm pretty sure there was a battle of the bands, and one of the bands that has come up on the podcast because Johnny Depp was in it was the Kids. They were in
Yeah.
that battle of the bands, and I think there were some others too, but that's what stands out to me. So yeah, I have heard of it, but I never listened to it. I was too young.
K102 was the first one. Then WSHE, She's Only Rock and Roll. I don't know if you remember that one.
Worse.
And then as time went by, you had 97 GTR, then you had Zeta, things like, but I don't want to get too ahead, but then you started to find like 88.5 WKPX, and if you were in the Miami area, you could throw on WVUM. So, but my dad being a guitar player, there was always like guitars around the house, and he had acoustics, but then in the garage is where there were electrics and amps. I remember the Fender Twin Reverb amp, and it had that red light, and you could smell the tubes. And I'd be like, "Oh yeah, we're getting ready to rock out," and he'd break out the electric, and I loved that. But the acoustic, I wasn't a huge fan of. Like it was okay. It didn't really do much for me. Um, but one day I was like 10, 11 years old, and while my dad was at work, I just got out his acoustic and I just started playing around with it. And I figured out the riff to Pretty Woman. And when my dad got home from work, I was like, "Hey, Dad, look at this." Da, 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 da. And my dad was like, "Wait a second. You just figure that out all on your own." And I was like, "Yeah." So that's when he was like, "All right, we got to get him some lessons." And my mom had a friend who, I guess she met her at church, who lived in Miami, like Biscayne and 63rd or something. And her and her husband were full-time musicians. And he was like a concert pianist, and she was like the lady that leans up against the baby grand and like croons and they did, I think, like 4 or 5 nights a week at all the hotels in South Beach, like the Fountain Blue. And so my mom was going over to her house one day and she's like, come with me because they have a son your age who plays guitar. And he's got it. And my mom was like, and he's got an electric guitar. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I want to go with you. So the first thing I noticed when I walked in the house is they had two baby grands in the living room, like opposite shapes to where they were like side by side. And I was like, wow, this is like a music house. And then I go upstairs to meet the son, and I open the door and he's got long hair. Like, I mean, like he looks like 12 years old. He looks like he's in a band and he's playing the guitar. And the first thing I notice is the guitar has distortion. And I was used to my dad like jamming and not, little overdrive, not much distortion, but he had like a full distortion tone. And I was like, what are you playing? And he's like, oh, I'm playing Van Halen. And I was like, who's Van Halen? And he's like, you don't know who Van Halen? And then I was like, how do you get the guitar to sound like that? And he's like, a distortion pedal. And I was like, I only play acoustic. I don't really know. So right away he started playing, and then he started putting his fingers on the neck. And I was like, what the fuck are you doing? So then he dropped the needle on Eruption by Van Halen, and I was like, that's a guitar? I was like, what? It was almost like I just entered another dimension, and my brain just went, I have to know how to do this.
Did that
So,
kid ever do anything else as far as you know?
yeah, James, we ended up becoming like best buddies. And it's funny because he had a third friend, this guy Al Diaz, and he would come over and just make us look stupid. Like he would just, I was like, what the fuck? And Al Diaz ended up being in a bunch of hair metal bands that played the Button South, but he was definitely like one of the guys that was like, this guy like shreds, period. He could play like Ingve, like, and James, he had a hair metal band. They were so cheesy. They were called Adonis. And the lead singer would like, he somehow another had like, he could have fire on his hands and stuff like, but
Thinking back to as you were growing up as a teenager, do you remember your first concert or maybe the second concert that you may have went to in South Florida?
my first concert, see, this is another thing we realized too, is that on Friday after school in 8th grade, my mom would put me on the Greyhound and I would go to Miami, and James' mom would pick me up. And as soon as we got to their house, his mom and dad had to go do a gig at the Fountain Blue. So they leave and we have the whole house. And James had a younger, James was like a year older than me. He had a younger sister that was my age. I had a sister who was a year older than me. And so she was James' age. So I started to tell my sister, I was like, yeah, we have the whole house to ourselves the whole weekend, like Friday night, Saturday night, like there's no parents. And that was an interesting time because here we are in like downtown Miami, and they would like give us a $20 bill and we take the bus to the Omni Mall, and like this is 1982, like Scarface era type stuff, and we're walking up and down Biscayne like it's no big deal. And I remember he was like, hey, you want to go see Journey at the Miami baseball stadium? And I was like, well, how are we going to do that? And he's like, just tell your parents you're staying for the weekend and my mom's going to drop us off. And so I told my sister, and my sister's like, I want to go. So we connived a way to get my sister to go with us, and sure enough, they dropped us off at Miami baseball stadium. We're like 12, 13 years old, all by ourselves all day long. And it's funny because this was the beginning of MTV, when you just knew who people were, because you came home from school and the first thing you do is flip on MTV and you just leave it on in the background all day long. And it was definitely an experience. And I kind of thought Journey was a little cheesy, because me and James were like sitting in his room shredding, and right away we were like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, like the Ozzy with Randy Rhoads. It was just like, it had to be heavy. It had to have shredding guitars. So, but it was a fun day. I think it was like the first time I like really smelled pot like in the air at the concert, and the first time I ever saw girls with their tops off on their boyfriend's shoulders at a concert. I was like, so yeah, that was an experience.
I bet, especially at that young age. Uh, as you were getting older, did you learn more about some of the local places you can go see a concert or a local band play out?
Uh, I would say when I was 16, up until the time that I got my license, you're at the mercy of the older people that would give you a ride somewhere. So my second concert was Iron Maiden at the Hollywood Sportatorium. My third concert was Van Halen 1984, which at the time, that was like seeing God. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of time at the Hollywood Sportatorium. Like, if you could go there, it didn't even matter who it was. Like, even if you didn't like them, concerts were $20 back then. So there was definitely some ones that I really wanted to go to, but like everybody I knew was like, if it wasn't Iron Maiden, nah, ain't going. So, in another great venue, I don't know if you remember or not, the Sunrise Musical Theater,
Yes.
right up the street. I mean, just like you didn't have to hike it all the way to Hollywood Sportatorium. Um, that was another when you get 16 years old, you can start to go to Sunrise and see some shows.
Who were some of the bands you remember seeing at Sunrise?
The very first band I ever saw was Night Ranger, on their very first, like it was like Don't Tell Me You Love Me, Sister Christian. And I was still in that mode where, the guy's playing like, and then one of the stock guys at Publix, who was 16 and I was 13, he was like, "You want to go see Black Sabbath?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah, I want to go see." But this was like Ian Gillan from Deep Purple was their singer. Like, it was, and I remember just going, man, people were falling asleep. I don't know if it's just because they were so stoned out of their mind, but I just remember everything was just like, duh, duh. It was like so slow. um, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I saw Eddie Murphy, Delirious, the Beastie Boys on the License to Ill tour with Public Enemy as the opening act. That was a good one.
I bet.
Um,
I bet that
but
was
but
memorable.
yeah, but I also missed. I think I saw Kiss with their makeup off. That was terrible. Even though I hadn't gone through my Kiss phase yet, I was a late bloomer. I didn't go through my Kiss phase till they put their makeup back on in 1996, and I went to the Miami Arena. Then I became a believer. But up until then, I just went to go. But once again, I was already starting to lose interest. I was just like, I didn't identify with the way these bands dress, like the whole. And it's funny because I didn't see Van Halen as one of those type of bands, even though they were probably the architects of hair metal. I didn't see it at the time, because one of the things I loved about Van Halen is in 1981, the very beginning of MTV, They were the only band that wasn't lip syncing in their videos. And I think that the wave that me and my bands were part of was the bands that were influenced by Van Halen, but said, hey, let's be nothing like that. Let's don't even try to be like that. So that there was a band. I went to Boyd Anderson. There was a band, they went to Coconut Creek, and they were a new wave band, and they needed a guitar player, and they couldn't find one because no guitar players wanted to play new wave because you couldn't shred. So I was so open-minded. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we're playing like Depeche Mode, like OMD, like, you know, like Bauhaus, like stuff like. And some of my friends were like, I cannot believe you're playing in this band. It's so cheesy. And I was like, you know what? I said, I like a lot of this stuff. I like how different it is. So, but now I'm 16, and now I can go to all ages shows. I can drive, and going to Boyd Anderson, there wasn't a lot of like long-haired rocker guys. There wasn't a lot of guys in bands. Most of the people were like either into like hip hop, or they were into, you know, whatever's cool on MTV, Duran, Sammy Hagar, Van Halen. But the first day of school for 11th grade, this kid walks in, skinny as a rail, long hair, and me and my little group were like, this guy's gotta be a musician. He's gotta be. So right away we were like, hey, come over here. And we're like, where are you coming from? And he's like, oh, we just moved to Inverary from North Miami. And we're like, sorry, musician? He's like, yeah, I play. He goes, my brother's in a really big band. And we're like, oh, really? What's the name of his band? He said, Tough Luck. He's like, my brother's the drummer of this band, Tough Luck. And we're like, that's a stupid name. Like, and he's like, yeah, but they're really good. You got to come see them. And we're like, okay. So we're 16 years old. And he goes, oh, they do all ages shows. You can come see them. So, and he was like, I'm the guitar tech for the guitar player. And the guitar player's the same age as us. And we were like, what? Wait, the guitar player's 16 years old and he's playing in bars? And he's like, yeah. And you're like, and you should see him. He's really good. So we went to, I think it was the Art Stocks Playpen or something. It was like, but on Federal Highway between like Oakland and Sunrise, like, and right away we could see how they were dressed. They were like, they're gonna definitely be hair metal. But when they started playing, it was like Dave Scott was like unbelievable. Like, and the drummer Todd Kelly, like the whole band, they had their shit together on such a professional level. I was like, and it was like two of the guys in the band were like, what, 22, 23, but two of the guys in the band were 16 years old. And right away we were like, oh, wow. And then we realized, like, so where else has all ages? Where can we go that has all ages? And then we just started to seek out anywhere that had all ages. But in like Summers on the Beach, the Button South, but like everything was hair metal. And most of the bands were terrible. And like Tough Luck would wipe the floor with these bands because they were like real. I mean, but sure. Don't get me wrong. I mean, our cheese-o-meter was just like, they were definitely cheesy, but what we were learning is like, okay, this is how you properly tune your drums. This is how you dial in a good guitar tone. Oh, okay, so you don't have to be uber loud on stage. We were just learning, like, And I had bands like in 8th grade, like I started a band, and because I had my first electric guitar, and we would rehearse at like a rehearsal space. Back in the 80s, there was Musicians Exchange, and our parents would drop us off after school, and we would rehearse and play. But it wasn't really like a serious thing where like we're gonna write our own songs, we're gonna do our own thing. So now at like 16 years old, I'm realizing I'm like, I could write my own songs. Wait a second. The next question is, what kind of songs do I want to write? And I realized right away, I do not want to write hair metal songs. I don't I don't want to dress that way. I don't want to do my hair that way. But it's funny because so many bands would ask me to audition, and I would get there and they would just be all like skinny, like they were starving themselves, and they were wearing like girls jeans, like so tight, and they'd be like, so could you like lose some weight and grow your hair really long? And I'm like, no, no, why? Like what? Because we have an image, and I'm in my head going, oh, fuck this. Like, so it wasn't really till I was like 18, 19 that we started to realize that there were other bands out there that weren't playing hair metal, but you had to go seek them out. You had to find them. And I think one of the first bands that I noticed that was not hair metal was they were called Beat the Press. And they were almost like an Elvis Costello, Squeeze, Joe Jackson, like English power pop. And the guitar player, the leader of the band, had gone to Boyd Anderson, but graduated like way before I did. His name, great guy to interview too, Mark Scandariato, who ended up becoming Mary Carlson's right hand person. She's one of the few that got a major label deal. She was like the women's alternative, like Indigo Girls, Melissa Etheridge, like that vibe.
Right.
She was in Vesper Sparrow.
I do know.
I think she might have even been in Lyrics for Lunch for a little bit, but she joined up with Mark, and Richard Uola from, what is it, Yesterday and Today Records in Miami.
Correct. Yes.
He had a record label. He helped them get a major label deal. They were kind of part of the whole the Mavericks and Nuclear Valdez. But I think it wasn't a local band that really changed us. It was the first was what was the record label in SST Records? It was a punk label in California, but it wasn't just all straight up punk, because in the late 80s, punk had a very eclectic thing going on. So you could call Husker Du and their replacements punk, but like the beginning of Dinosaur Jr., and a friend like gave us this cassette, and it was a SST compilation, and it had 1987, it had a Soundgarden song on it, and we were like, this is really different. And then the Dinosaur Jr. is really different. And then that's when we discovered Uncle Sam's on University and Commercial. I'm sure you know it.
Of course, in Lauderhill.
But yeah, the first time we walked into Uncle Sam's, we were like, holy shit, there's a whole nother world going on here. And you just spend hours like looking, and they would even let you like take it out and listen to it. So that's when we started to realize like there's so much more going on. And that is when we discovered Jane's Addiction. And Jane's Addiction's first album was a live album recorded at the Whiskey, and it was a live album. Like, it wasn't polished, it wasn't produced, it was just like raw. Like, and sometimes he's singing off key, and sometimes the guitar's out of, and just those tribal drum beats, like all of it. And the fact that he was putting like a cool little guitar solo in there, not like overtly shredding. And that was an eye-opener, because that was like, I feel like Jane's Addiction was like a band where I was like, well, if I was going to write, I wanted to write something heavy, but not just. So when I heard Jane's Addiction, it was definitely one of the most unique things I had heard. And I wasn't thinking, hey, let's just rip this off. But it just opened my eyes. Like, you could have heavy guitars, but do different things with it. And then the next band I discovered was the Pixies. And what can you say about the Pixies? Like, nothing sounds like the Pixies. And those two bands, the Pixies and Jane's Addiction, that really made me want to start a band. And that's when I started to talk to my friends, and I was like, we should really think about starting a band. And
Is this the early beginnings of Dore Soul?
it is the very beginnings. The only thing is that oh man, I got in a little bit of trouble right after high school. I made the best fake IDs that you ever saw. And we were at a hotel party on the beach, Lauderdale by the Sea, and we're making IDs in the hotel rooms, like, and the party gets broken up, and the cops show up. I get arrested for the fake IDs. And if I went 1 year without getting in any trouble, it dropped off my record like it never happened. In the meantime, my buddy, who would become the guitar player of Dore Soul, Jimmy, him and another friend, they're going to see bands they're going to South Beach, and I'm like, I gotta work, I gotta close Domino's, I gotta work tomorrow night, I gotta work for it. So all of a sudden he's like, man, we went to Ron Wood from the Stones had a club in South Beach called Woody's on the Beach, and Jane's Addiction played Woody's on the Beach. And this was when they were nobody. And the band Nuclear Valdez, who ended up getting signed to Epic Records, was the opening act. So he came back and he's like, man, this band Nuclear Valdez, holy shit, they're so good. Jane's Addiction blew my mind. And so then he's like, we're going to go see Skinny Puppy at Club New. And I'm like, what's Club New? And he's like, it's another club in South Beach. And so whenever I would get a night that I could go out, like, we discovered the Kitchen Club, Club Beirut, and we saw a band called The Goods. And The Goods that's another band that you should definitely interview. The Goods, it was two brothers, Jim and John Camacho, and they could sing. I mean, they had like real songs, like they were so good. So now I realize once I'm out of trouble and paid off this attorney, I gotta get back into this. So I had like a guitar and a little amp in the office at Domino's. So when I finally did have a band, a lot of those people were like, became huge fans because they saw me go through this process. But it was definitely something that I used when I started Dore Soul, because I approached it kind of like a business. Like, if you're going to do it the way you would manage a Domino's.
Right.
Um,
Who did you,
sounds,
yeah. Who did you start Dory's Soul with?
My my best friend, my wingman, like when James Hadzopoulos lived in Shaker Village. I know you know Shaker Village, but he was the one that we both in 8th and 9th grade were obsessed with learning how to shred. But then he was the one whose mom would go to work at 11 o'clock. He would record the Off the Beaten, or the DIY, the show on MTV. Like, and he was always like, he's the one that showed me 88.5. And like, I remember he turned me on to the Sugar Cubes. Like, who the fuck are the Sugar Cubes? Like, so like Jimmy could shred, but he also, and he was the only one that didn't make fun of me for being in a new wave band. So, and we would just have conversations, man. We would just sit in the car and listen to songs and go, man, we got to write some songs and it's got to be like this. It's got to be like that. And in the meantime, while I was doing the Domino's thing, it's funny because he would show up at Domino's and everybody be like, uh-oh, Jimmy's here. They're going to start shredding. But he was like, he got asked to be in a cover band at 18 years old. And I'm going to see his cover band. I'm like, dude, this is so cheesy. And he's like, I know, but I'm going to get $150 at the end of the night. And I was like, what? What the fuck? So from 18 to 19, while I did I don't know, maybe 19 to 20. While I'm doing the Dominoes, he's doing the cover band. And he's making money. But every time I go to see him, I'm like, once I'm done with this, you're going to quit that cover band and we're starting an original band. And he's like, okay. So we started to put our feelers out for a drummer. And a girl that we know from high school was like, you remember Gary Norton? And he was like 2 grades ahead of us, but his younger brother was in our grade. So we were like, yeah. But the thing about Gary Norton, and he was like the gothic kid there were no like goth kids in like 84, 85. He was like looking like Robert Smith when it was not cool. Like it became very cool to do that. But in 84, 85, like he stuck out like a sore thumb. We're starting to take in all of this but we didn't want to be like any of it. We were like, I'm not gonna rap like or I wasn't even gonna be the singer. I mean, but we were just like taking it all in and we started to realize that what most bands did, they would get a warehouse. So we started warehouse hunting and Jimmy's cover band had a warehouse out of Nob Hill and Commercial, way out there by Sunrise Musical Theater, there's another tie into that. There was a band that rehearsed in Jimmy's warehouse complex called Nicky Charm, and they were straight up hair metal. I mean, like Warrant, Poison hair metal. But Jimmy was always like, this drummer, dude, this guy is so good. He's got a awesome, like, red drum set with these big, long bass drums. And I was like, the big, long bass drums, that's kind of cheap. And he's like, but we talked about trying to get him, but before we got Gary. But when I had a night off from Domino's, we went to the warehouse and his drums were gone. We were like, where's Phil? His name was Phil, by the way. Oh, Phil quit. Why? Him and the guitar player from Toy Soldier are starting a new band called Saigon Kick. And we're like, who's Toy Soldier? Like, well, this guy Jason Bueller, like had this band Toy Soldier, and so we're like, I don't know. So, But then when Jimmy went to the Jane's Addiction show at Woody's on the Beach in South Beach, he saw Phil and Jason in the very back, just like watching. And he's like, man, I want to go see this Saigon Kick band because the way they were watching Jane's Addiction, they're going to do something that's not going to be straight up hair metal. And I remember like around that time, like Alice in Chains came out, and I go, this is hair metal, but it's not hair metal. It's like, it's something, and it's cool, but I just thought it still had like tinges of hair. So the very first Saigon Kick show, Jimmy went to it. I had to fucking work at Domino's, and he came back and he's like, these guys are doing a Jane's Addiction type thing, but they're still putting in the and so I went to go see him, and I was like, and so that's when we started to really be like, something is going to happen, and I don't know what it's going to be, but one of these days, this hair metal shit's going to be done. And when it is, we want to be that band that's there to catch you. Well, there's going to have to be some bands that are going to have to show them. And that kind of became our motivation. And so I got a 4-track recorder and a drum machine. And we started to like write songs in our room, like program the drums exactly how we wanted to. And we met Gary, and we were kind of showing Gary, like, we kind of want to do something like this. And then we started, and then more places started to open up, and like Reunion Room, Squeeze hadn't opened yet. There was City Limits had an alternative rock room like in the back. And it was kind of cool because a lot of these mainstream places had these little rooms in the back, like, oh, this is the room for you guys. And this is our room in here. And it was cool because you started to see the same people at these places, and you would start to talk to them. And right away, we noticed this one dude, and he was tall and skinny. And when we first met him, he had dirty blonde hair. The next time we saw him, his hair was black. And then the next time we saw him, he's carrying a lunch pail. And we're like, who is this dude? So we go up to him one day, and we're like, what you got in the lunch pail? And he's like, I don't know. Let's see. And he opens it up, and he had cassettes. And he was like, it's a cassette of my band. And we're like, well, what's your band called? And he's like, Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. And we were like, oh, really? And we were like, we got a cassette too of our band. He goes, oh, you guys have a band? And we're like, yeah, we'll get you a cassette and you give us a cassette. So we started to talk to him. And of course, his name was Brian Warner. And he wrote the music column for the BCC paper. And then I think he wrote for a rag called Tonight Today or something. So whenever there was a band on tour coming through town, he would get to interview them. So whether it was Nine Inch Nails, Jane's Addiction, Skinny Pup, like, he would get to interview these bands. And we were like, hey, do you know who Saigon Kick is? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I gave them all their ideas. And we're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I was friends with Jason when he started Toy Soldier. And he goes, and when they started Saigon Kick, he goes, I'm the one that gave him the idea to be more alternative and be more gothic and wear all black. And at the time, we kind of didn't believe him. I found out years later when I became friends with Matt Kramer, the first singer of Saigon Kick. He was like, no. He's like, because Matt had a pair of combat boots that had like flowers painted all over them. And we were always like, dude, those combat boots are badass. And years later, Matt's like, Brian painted those for me at rehearsal one night. He was like, wear these. These are cool. So we started to realize, like, we thought the we thought the music on the cassette was terrible because we were just like, it just, it wasn't mixed properly. Like it was industrial music. Which in retrospect now, I, I feel a lot differently about it. But at the time, it was like, you had to really be into like what Ministry was doing at the time, or Skinny Puppy, and there, I think 9 Inch Nails had just come out, and our drummer Gary was like, "Oh, you got to hear this band 9 Inch Nails." So when we finally got a warehouse and started to get serious about starting a band, so Gary got a job at Specs Music, which was awesome because right away he started to become friends with people that worked there, like record promoters that would come into the store. So there's a whole little family of the Specs Music people, and I know you've interviewed some of them. Laura, the drummer of Jack Off Jill. So that was cool because he got to get first dibs on cassettes when they came in, and bands that were so now things are like brewing, and you can see things are happening, and Saigon Kick's getting bigger, and kids are actually trying to slam dance at a Saigon Kick show, and they're trying to like stage dive, and we're looking at all of this happening, and then in the meantime, now I've left Domino's. I'm back in college. My first semester back at school, my speech class, I sit in the back row, and this dude sits right next to me in the back row. And the teacher's like, wherever you're sitting, that's your seat for the whole year. So I look at, I said, well, I guess we're going to be sitting next to each other the whole year. And I can't remember, he had a t-shirt on or something, 7 seconds. And I was like, so are you a musician? He goes, yeah, I'm a drummer. And I go, do you have a band? He goes, yeah. And I was like, what's the name of your band? He said, Radio Baghdad. And I was like, what's your name? Chris. And I was like, oh, I have a band too, Dore Soul. And he's like, oh, yeah. And I said, I'll bring you a cassette. And he goes, yeah, I'll bring you a cassette too. So we exchanged cassettes, and he wasn't a huge fan of what we did because we still were like doing 4 tracks in a drum machine. And they had actually gone to a studio and had real Studio 13, Jeremy Stoska. You got to interview him. But Chris was another one that was like opening, and he was like, we get played on 88.5. And I was like, what? Your band gets played on the, and he's like, yeah, yeah. A younger kid who lived in Shaker Village had a birthday party in the rec room at Shaker Village, and he hired a local punk band called Quit. And before we could even get there, it had already been broken up by the cops. But the name Quit stuck in our head because we were like, how come we don't know who this band is? And they're like, well, they're from Miami. They're big in Miami. And I was like, well, how does this kid know? Oh, he's really into punk. And we were like, okay. So then we go to Uncle Sam's, and there's Quit Earlier Thoughts for sale right there. And we're like, oh, they have a, okay. So we bought that. And it was on a CD, which was weird because no local bands had CDs. They had cassettes. So now Dore Soul, we actually have songs. We're auditioning singers. We put ads in all the papers, Rag Magazine, Tonight Today, Excess, like looking for a singer. Every singer we get is like a hair metal. We called them hair metal rejects, our hair farm. I hate to say, because I'm still today good friends with a lot of the guys in those hair metal bands, but it was like they would show up and be like, wow. And we would play them the music, and then the stuff we'd be like, see what you come up with over this music. And we'd be like, we're going to give you a little time to, and one whole year, 40 singers later, we still hadn't found a singer. So by this time, we have a mic set up, and we're just scatting ideas, and we're writing our own songs. And we're also in a warehouse complex with 9 other bands. And these bands run the gamut. I mean, you had a band called Naked Rhythm who ended up becoming big in the alternative scene. But at the time, they were like Living Color or something. You had a straight up hair metal band called Poser. You had a band called the Vagues who ended up becoming the Nikki Taylors, and the legendary Pat Joyce was the bass player, and definitely somebody to interview. The Vagues were great. There was a band called Sister Venus. So Sister Venus was definitely like a post punk. They were the most punk thing in the complex. And we would take breaks and walk from warehouse to warehouse, and every band was just so different and unique. And we would like and they'd come over and be like, "Oh, you guys are like doing the Jane's Addiction thing." Or like, "This is nothing like it." Oh, I mean, there's little Pixies thrown in there too. So we're all like critiquing each other. And then we would all go to Reunion Room or the little club at Mr. Laughs and now Washington Square had opened. So sometimes we drive to South Beach and the cool thing about Washington Square is they had 4 original bands 7 nights a week. They paid you next to nothing. But if you could get booked at Washington Square, even on the first band on a Monday night, you had a gig. And the other cool thing about Washington Square is they weren't fans of the hair metal bands. So if you were not hair metal, there was a very good chance you were going to get a gig there. So we said, fuck it. Let's just play out as a 3-piece. We have enough songs. I've already started to kind of sing. And the only thing is when we wrote, sometimes I would be on bass and Jimmy would be on guitar. Sometimes he would be on bass and I would be on guitar. So, and then when we finished the songs, I didn't know what he was playing and he didn't know what I was playing. So I was like, so we finally got our very first show at Washington Square. And this was like September of 1990. And I played bass half of the show, and then we switched, and I played guitar the other half of the show. And everybody loved us. It went good, and the manager guy Doc, who anybody that had bands down here knows Doc. He a very interesting dude. He was like, "Yeah, I'll give you guys another show. I'm just busy right now. You're gonna have to come back." And we're like, "Fuck, man, we live in Fort Lauderdale." So one night, I'd left Domino's, returned back to school. I'm working at Pizza Hut delivery, and Gary closes Specs Music, and I'm like, "I'm gonna come pick you up, and we're gonna go to Washington Square and nail down our second gig." So we get to Washington Square. Doc gives us another date. We're on our way home, and I'm extremely tired because I'd been to school all day, worked all night. I had one beer, and we're on our way home from Washington Square. Gary's dead asleep because I think he was trying to go to school, work in the bakery, and work at Spec. So he's sleeping, and I'm trying to stay awake. And I have the air on in my face, and I remember vividly Gary had just gotten the Black Crowes' first album, and we had the cassette in, and I remember vividly the Black Crowes were playing, and I closed my eyes for a couple of seconds, and when I opened my eyes, the road was turning, and I didn't have time to turn, and I hit the median wall, and it immediately, we weren't wearing our seatbelts, and immediately we were both ejected from the vehicle. I'm flying through the air. I hear the wind in my ears, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to roll down the highway. And next thing you know, I roll down the highway. And we're
Did you guys have significant injuries as a result of that?
yeah, I spent this was I want to say it was like November 4th, 1990, and my birthday's November 30th. So I spent Thanksgiving, my birthday, Christmas, New Year's in the hospital. I shattered my 3 lower vertebrae. I broke my pelvis. I broke my femur in 2 different spots. So I had to have a metal rod put in my leg. I cracked my head open. Gary was dead asleep, so Gary didn't tense up. The only thing Gary had was a concussion and 2 bruised ribs. And so that was the end of Dore's soul for a little bit. So I had to my 3 lower vertebrae, the way they shattered, the pieces of the bones were so close together that they were like, instead of doing surgery and putting in artificial vertebrae, if you can just lay on your back, not sit up, not roll to the side for 2.5 months, the bones will mend, and then we can do the surgery and put the metal rod in your leg. But for 2.5 months, you cannot sit up, you can't roll side to side. So that's why I stayed in the hospital, and I'm laying flat on my back, so I had to have like people like feeding me. It was another game changer, because first of all, it made me realize, like, if I were to die tomorrow, I would at least want to know that I chased after my dreams, after what I really want to do. And I also realized that our little warehouse community of 9 bands, like, every one of them came to see me in the hospital. Every one of them brought me stuff. And to this day, I'm still good friends. And it just showed me that even though we were all different, even though we looked at each other as competition, and we thought this band sucked, this band's cheesy, like, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, we're all friends, we're all musicians. And but after like 2-3 months, Gary got out right away. Gary was in the hospital for a week and got out. But him and Jimmy came and they said, all right, we have to make a decision about the warehouse, because it's been 3 months and nothing's happening, and we're paying rent on it. So they made the decision to give up the lease and close the warehouse. And this was tough, man. This was hard for me. So I finally got out in like the end of January 91. But I had to go through physical therapy. I had to learn how to walk again. I had to learn how to bend my knee again. I had to wear a back brace that went from like my shoulder here all the way down to my whatever. And I had to wear that, like, I think through February and March. And so fine, it was only till like April, May that I could actually start to function and do things. And in the meantime, the Vagues asked Jimmy to become their guitar player. This was Pat Joyce. And don't get the Vagues were great. Well, we love the Vagues, who became the Nicky Taylors. So it kind of hurt me, because if there was one band I didn't want Jimmy to be a part of, it was that band, because they were actually a really good band, and they were like dialed into the scene, like they knew everybody. They were called Lick City, actually, when they were in high school. They were a hair metal band. Somebody in one of your interviews, I think it was Fritz, talked about Lick City. But so I got pissed, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna keep writing on my 4-track in my room. Fuck you. I'm gonna do it. So if you want to stay in that band, you can. But this train's rolling, and this is gonna happen no matter what. And in the meantime, like, me and Gary are going out while Jimmy's rehearsing with the Vagues, and I'm telling Gary, I'm like, we're gonna do this. And Gary's like, I know, but like, who are we gonna get? Like, and I was like, we're gonna find somebody. And I had a bass rig that I kept at Gary's house, and we'd go to Gary's house, and he'd be on drums and I'd be on bass, and we'd jam, and we'd go out and see bands and network. And then one night I see Pat Joyce out at one of the bars, and he's like, dude, man, I love the sound of that bass rig you got at Gary's house. I was like, what? How do you know what that bass? Oh, I don't know, man. I was just, and I look at Gary and I go, what's going on? I go, how come Pat Joyce played out of my bass rig? And Jimmy and Gary looked at me and they're like, because Gary's going to join the Vagues too. They'd lost their drummer. And I was like, really? And I was like, that's fucked up. So that really got me going. But then the leader of the Vagues, Chris Simmons, went through a period of some substance usage that kind of, I love Chris like a brother, so I'm not going to say anything beyond that. One of the most talented songwriters and musicians I know, and now today he still is prolific, still writing. He's definitely somebody that would be great to interview. So he dropped out, and all of a sudden Gary and Jimmy called me up and they're like, let's do Dore Soul. And I was like, are you sure? You guys aren't going to bail on me again? They're like, dude, what did you want us to do? You were in the hospital. Like, so I was like, all right, let's get another warehouse.
Did you
So
feel good about that moment, or were you a little hesitant just based on the circumstances that what led up to it in the first place?
I couldn't blame them, because I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, you want to play, you're a musician. And they were still like my brothers. I mean, especially Jimmy. I mean, the history that we had, like, we were brother in what me and Gary had gone through, the whole car accident thing. Like, it was, you want to talk about bonding, like, and I mean, the only thing is, I was like, why couldn't you just tell me? I go, why did Pat Joyce have to slip? And but when things happen the way they did, where they wanted to do it again, it was like I had a choice. I could either go out and start from step one. Okay, so here's the quick connection. When I was still in my back brace, and I don't think Jimmy and Gary had joined the Vagues yet, we saw an ad in Rag Magazine that Quit was looking for a guitar player. That their guitar player, Russell, had gone away to college and they needed a guitar player. So I called and I told Jimmy. Jimmy was over at my house and he's like, dude, do it. And I was like, yeah, but I mean, I want to do Dore Soul again. He goes, dude, I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they were playing. Maybe this was that period where they were playing with the Vagues and I didn't know it yet. So Jimmy was pushing me. He's like, dude, do it. You should do it. He goes, because you have a good ear. You can figure those songs out way better than I could. And he goes, plus your juggas. Like, so I call and Andre answers the phone. And I was like, hey, you looking for a guitar player? And he goes, yeah. And he's like, "Hey, Addy, I got a guy on the phone. Where do you live?" And I go, "Fort Lauderdale." "Oh, it's kind of far. We live in Key Biscayne." He's like, "Do you know our music?" And I go, "Well, I have your CD." And he's like, "Can you play any of the songs?" And I said, "Well, I haven't sat down and learned them." He goes, "How do your jugas sound?" And I didn't even know that term. I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, like, and I go, "Oh, like the 16th and 32nd palm mutes." And he's like, "Yeah." And I turned on my amp and I just went, and he goes, "Dude, Addy, come here. You got to listen to this guy's jugas. Hey, do that again." And I did it again. And Addy was like, "Holy shit, man, his jugas sound great." And then he's like, "Okay, do us a favor, learn as many songs as you can on the CD, and then next week we'll have you come down." So I just started with song number one and I went through the whole fucking CD and I learned every fucking song. Um, but more than anything, I was just blown away that they could be that professional at such a young age and write a whole album worth of original songs. Um, and they were real too. Like the lyrics, you could tell like they were written from the standpoint of a kid who's 17 years old. I mean, like they weren't being fake, they weren't being pretentious. I gained a whole new respect when I got to the Andre's parents had a huge house in Key Biscayne, and they had a little back room by the pool. And I mean, you open the door and it was like a little bitty storage area for like pool stuff. And everybody's like right up on each other. And they're like, "You ready?" And they're like, "Let's do it." And right away, I was like, these guys are pro. And it opened my eyes. And even because Jimmy came with me, and Jimmy's just like, "Yeah, I drove him, and I'm kind of like his roadie guy." Like, he didn't say, like, we weren't like, we have our own band. But because Jimmy was just like, "I want to see, I want to be there, I want to know what goes on." And me and him were both just like, "Fuck, man." I mean, because they were putting me to the test. Because like as soon as they would end, they're like, "We're gonna go through the album in the order, and we're not gonna stop." And I was like, "All right." So as soon as the song would end, the next song would start. As soon as that would end, the next one would start. And they were kind of doing the poker face, like not like just like not looking at me, not smiling too much. But I could tell and I knew like I was nailing it. I was like, I'm nailing these songs. So when it was all done, they were like, "Holy shit." They were like, "I can't believe you learned the whole album. And I can't believe you played it. Like 90% of what you played was exactly." They're like, and then Addy was like, "I don't even know how you knew which was my part and which was his part." And I was like, "Well, I figured if you're singing, you probably weren't going to play this part. And, I figured if you were singing, you probably were going to play this." And he's like, "Wow, man, that's." So I went back for like 3 or 4 more rehearsals. And it was a hike. I mean, going to Key Biscayne and back, but the traffic wasn't bad as it is now. But
Right.
and then they popped the question. They were like, "Do you want to join our band?" And I said, "I do want to join your band, but I have a question." I said, "I also write my own songs and I have my own originals, and I'm just wondering, are you open to have any other songwriters in the band?" And Addy's like, "No, I'm the songwriter." And I was like, "Okay." And then I think on this one day, like Andre and Tony gave me a ride home because I don't think I could drive a car yet. I was still in my physical therapy mode. And so on the way home, they were like, "Hey, do you have a cassette of your original stuff?" And I put some of it in. They were like, "Oh, that's cool." And and I knew they were just like they and I think that's when they realized like it what they did was not like my cup of tea, but I could do it. And I think that's when they realized that I wasn't the right guy. And they were right. They were 100% correct. I was not. And the lesson to be learned is like, you can be a hired gun. And if you're good, you can play anything. But is it really what you want to do? And are you really? But some people can write and some people can't write. Everybody's got the role that they play in a band. And some people are the guy that they play what the other guy writes, and it doesn't discount them at all, because I can't do what some people can do, and then other people can't do what I do. And I think one of the hardest things to do is to write original music that's good. There is no right or wrong way to write a song, because I love all styles and you can write in any style that you want. But when something's good, when you hear it, like, even if it's not, if it's a disco song, disco might not be my thing, but if it's good, I'm going to be like, that's good. If it's a thrash metal song, thrash metal might not be my thing, but if it's good, what am I going to say? It's not good. I mean, but there's a lot of crap. And so
When you think back on the recording aspect, the first Dory Soul cassette had a controversial title, somewhat. Blowjob was the title. I know it created some challenges for some DJs at WKPX, which we can get to in just a moment. But talk about that if you can, Carey, for a moment. What was the recording like for that first tape? Has a lot of good songs on it. So, what do you remember about the making of that cassette?
well, when we finally got back on the horse, so to say, and got a new warehouse, it was decided that we were going to find a bass player, and I was going to be the front man, and Jimmy's going to play guitar. So even though I'm a guitar player, I'm not really a front man. They were like, you have the personality, and you already wrote all the lyrics and the melodies, so you should just be the singer. And because Jimmy's like, I'm a shy, quiet guy, like, I'm not. And Gary's actually the best singer in the band, but Gary's like, I'm a drummer. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but he sings in the car, and you're like, fuck, dude, you should be the lead singer. So I got thrown into that position because they're like, they're your lyrics, they're your songs, this is your baby, you're the singer. So we needed to find a bass player. So now we're like 21, 22, putting our feelers out, and we get a lead from one of the bands back in the old warehouses. They're like, we know this kid who went to Piper. His name's Derek Sullivan. He was in a hair metal band called Bad News, and he's looking to do something. So when we met Derek is still kind of in hair metal mode. He doesn't know who the Pixies are, even though he went to Piper, and there's 88.5 right there. He was like, yeah, I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of that crap. But he had a good look. He had beautiful hair, and like, he's like, and he was teachable. Like, he was like, just show me what you want me to do and I'll do it. So we showed him the songs. He showed up on time. He was a team player. And so we were like, I think we got a band. So now Marilyn Manson is playing out. They don't have a drummer. They're playing out with a drum machine. We went to the first couple of Marilyn Manson shows at Churchill's. Then, because Brian got to interview people, he interviewed Trent Reznor on the Pretty Hate Machine tour, while Nine Inch Nails opened for Jesus and Mary Chain at Club New. I mean, this is how little Nine Inch Nails was at the time. So Brian gets the opening slot because he had already interviewed Trent Reznor, and he gave Trent Reznor a tape, and Trent Reznor's like, I'll get you guys on the opening bill. So it was Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails, and Jesus and Mary Chain at Club New. And that's when we were like, holy shit, something's going to happen here. And this was the classic lineup with Brad on bass and fucking, and it's funny because we realized the keyboard player went to our high school. We were like, that's Stephen Beer on keyboards. Holy shit. But once again, he graduated in like 82. We're class of 87, 88. So, but now Brian, we're buddies with Brian now because Brian goes to all the places we go. We share cassettes. He's friends with the Vagues, Pat Joyce. So we give Brian the cassette of the newest songs, and he's like, when are you guys gonna book your first show with as this lineup? And I was like, well, the moment we do, I'll let you know. And he's like, I can probably help you guys get a gig at +5. And this is right around the time Nevermind came out, which you can't understate the impact. Whether you like Nirvana or not, you cannot change the fact that once that shit hit the airwaves, once that video was on MTV, it was like overnight, all those hair metal people wanted that. They wanted anything that was different, off the beaten path. And our first show, I want to say it was like maybe like a month or two before that. And we played with two hair metal bands, and you know, nobody's really, it was no big deal because we weren't a theatrical band. We, like, Marilyn Manson was very theatrical, and we were more like, you know, cutoffs, you know, t-shirts, whatever, Chuck Taylors. So now we got booked a show there. Somebody said, you want to do a gig with us here? We do the Ambassador. I don't know if you remember the Ambassador in Deerfield Beach. So now we've done like 3 or 4 shows, and we're starting to get a reputation. And then I remember waiting tables at Chili's one night, and the guy in the kitchen's got the radio on, and Smells Like Teen Spirit came on. I go, what are you listening to? And he goes, WSHE. And I go, what? This song is on. And I went in the kitchen. I'm like, this song is on WSHE. They don't even fucking play Alice in Chains, and they're playing this. I was like, this kind of has a Pixies vibe to it. And then I call Gary, and I'm like, hey, have you seen this? He works at Specs, and Gary's like, I already got it. He goes, it's in my car. He goes, I'm going to listen to it on the way home. And we're like, and then I see the video when I get home that night, and I'm like, this is it, dude. I go, something's about to change massively, because now there's like a heavy band that is stealing the thunder from, and sure enough, our very next show, people are just right at the front of the stage, just like all into what we're doing, who a week before were, and now all of a sudden you see nobody's wearing hairspray in their hair anymore. People are starting to not wear such tight jeans, the spandex, the leopard skin. It just, like, so quickly and so fast. And you know, I mean, I don't blame, if you're not a musician and you don't follow, you just go with whatever's cool, you know. And it's like, I tell people all the time, like, if you were a class of 87, 88, and you were a musician, you were like the end of the hair metal era, the beginning of the alternative era, and you either adapted or you were done. And Brian, Manson was managed by John Tovar. I don't know if you know John Tovar, and his partner managed Nuclear Valdez, got them their deal with Epic Records, managed the Mavericks, the first Cuban country band, managed the Goods, I think managed Quit for a short time, managed Marilyn Manson. And now, we're starting to meet, oh, there's these other bands that are part of this scene. So now we not only know the Goods and Quit and Marilyn Manson, but now we're meeting Collapsing Lungs. Now we're meeting the Holy Terrors. Now we're meeting I Don't Know. And that we started to realize, like, and a lot of the bands were from Miami. If you were a Broward band doing anything that was remotely alternative, it was like, oh, that's cool. And they kind of called it the alternative rock was more of like a Miami thing, I guess, because Churchill's is there, Washington Square's there, the Kitchen Club, Club Beirut. So Brian, we opened for Manson. He tells John Tovar to come early and check out Dore Soul. So now John Tovar wants to manage us. And he gives us a contract. And everybody's like, do not sign a contract. Unless you're a signed band, you should never sign any contract. So we signed the contract. And then right away, we started to notice that. And now, instead of us booking, John Tovar does all our bookings. So we're like, hey, we want to play Reunion Room. You need to be patient. I am getting the Mansons in there. I have another band, and then I will be booking. And we're like, dude, the guy told us so we could play there next week. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. You guys are still a new band. You're cultivating. And we're like, what the fuck, dude? And so whether we were right or wrong, we started to get the idea that Brian was controlling John Tovar in order to control the other bands. So Manson could become like the big thing while you know what I mean? Like, Manson's going to get all the cherry picking of the gigs. And then like, wait, don't give me. So, and then here is where we are booked at, I don't know if you remember Rosebuds. It became the Metal Factory.
Right.
And then right at that time, it's us and Marilyn Manson at Rosebuds, and Trent Reznor now has the Downward Spiral #1 album. They gave him his own imprint, Nothing Records, and gave him the power to sign bands. So now Trent Reznor is coming to that gig, and he's bringing a guy from Interscope to see Manson. So we're like, oh, fuck, man, he's gonna like us. Because we were like, because as much as we were friends with Manson, as much as we liked them, we thought their songs were kind of like joke songs, almost like parody songs. Like, it was just like not serious. Like, whereas we saw ourselves as like, we're writing real songs, we're serious songwriters, you know, like, and he's gonna like us better than Manson, and we're gonna so we're like in the rehearsal, like, man, we're gearing up to blow Trent Reznor away, and then all of a sudden John Tovar calls us and he goes, we're adding another band to the bill. Brian has been working with this new all-girl band called Jack Off Jill. So they're going to be, and I said, okay, so they're going to go on first? No, you guys are going to go on first, then Jack Off Jill, then, and I'm like, wait a second. I go, they haven't even played one show, and you're making, and we have a following? No. And he's like, I'm telling you, Carey, you need to listen to me. And I said, so that means there's no way Trent Reznor's going to see us. Carey, this is not a Dore Soul showcase. Trent Reznor's not going to be there anyway. He's not even going to see the Jack Off Jill. He's only come to see Manson. Get that out of your head. You need to be patient. You need to slow. And we were like, fuck that, man. I don't know. And so that night at the warehouse, we're like, we don't want to work with John Tovar anymore. And we tell Derek shows up, and Derek's like, wait a second, what's the name of that band, Jack Off Jill? Derek's best friend at Piper from 8th grade through his senior year was Jessica. Derek is like, Jessica and me were inseparable. She was like my wing girl, and I was like her, like, and he's like, I didn't know she was a singer. I didn't know she was a songwriter. I thought she was just like this punk rock gothic chick and he's like, I haven't talked to her since we graduated from high school. And I'm like, so you know the singer of this band? And I'm like, dude, you need to go talk to her. So sure enough, we go out that night to like Now There's Squeeze, and he's like, there she is right there. And I'm like, okay. And there's everybody. There's like all the Manson, all the Jack, and here comes Dore Soul. And he goes to talk to Jessica, and she's not being nice to him. And he's like, I don't know what's going on. He goes, but she's like blowing me off like we were never friends. And I'm like, and I was like, she knows what's going on. And I go up to Brian and I'm like, dude, I go, what's going on? I go, why are we having to go on first? And then this band, they haven't even played a show yet. And he repeated what John Tovar said. And he's like, slow down, man. He goes, and then he said something like, don't bite the hand that feeds you. And I was like, wait a second. What do you mean by that, Brian? I go, you telling me that you feed me? And Brian's like, well, I mean, I didn't say that. And I'm like, yeah, you kind of did, though. And then, I mean, and in retrospect, I do have to say, he helped us get our first gigs. He did a lot for our band, but this put a rift, and we made flyers for that show. And this was going to be their second show with a real drummer. So we wanted Tovar to rip up our contract. And we're like, I guarantee you, if we talk shit about Manson on our flyers, Tovar will let us out of our contract. We weren't, I mean, and we were just like, we had that fucking punk rock mentality of just like, fuck you, man, you know? And so we figured in our minds, Tovar's going to get so pissed, he's going to be like, and we were 100% correct. We made a flyer that said, Dore Soul, the early show with the all new and improved Marilyn Manson. And then we put Dore Soul, the early show with the greatest band to ever walk the earth, Marilyn Manson. And then Dore Soul with the Marilyn Manson Freak Show, which pissed off some of their fans. They were not happy about that. And Brian even called me, and he's like, hey, I was out flyering tonight and I saw some of your flyers on the car. He goes, what are you doing? And I go, we're just joking, Brian. It's not a big deal. We're just fucking around. And he's like, yeah. He goes, I think you guys are hurting yourself. You're not hurting us, because our fans think that's pretty fucked up. So then we started to have second thoughts. So we stopped putting those out, put them away. But then at the gig, Tovar was like, I think it's smart that we part ways. I think this was not a good idea. And I think I'm going to let you guys out, and you're free to do what you want to do. And so many other bands were like, oh, that's awesome, because we had to get an attorney to get out of our contract with Tovar. Because so many, like so many bands were like, you got to, like, once he's got you, he ain't going to let you go. And then if you get signed, he's going to go to the label and be like, hey, look at this contract. So we were very happy that he let us go, and now we're ready to record. So there was a studio in Davie, and the guy who owned the studio, Gary Strider, he he put out these compilation albums at the end of the 80s called Unsigned 1, Unsigned 2, and Unsigned 3. And they're hair metal albums. Are you familiar with them?
I am. They're hard to track down.
But he got notoriety, he made money. They were distributed worldwide. I mean, and so he was kind of known as like this guy who was young. He was the same age as us, and he was a businessman. He made shit happen. And at the time, he was managing a band called The Itch. And The Itch were like the Chili Peppers of the local scene. But like, and we became friends with them. And they were good. So I'm still friends with Mick, the bass player, who grew up with Load. He actually filled in on bass with Load for a while, Mick. So we're talking to them. We're like, where'd you guys record? They're like, we recorded at Gled Studio, Strider Studio. So we go there and we're like, we want to record one song to get on WKPX, WVUM. I think WSHE had just started a local show. So the whole time we're recording that one song, Strider's like, I like what you guys do. And then he came to see us and he's like, you guys are fucking great. He's like, do you have management? And we're like, yeah, Tovar's our manager. Oh my God, I can't believe you signed a contract with Tovar. He's like, you know, I manage The Itch, right? And I'm like, yeah. And then the whole thing happened while we had our shit set up, because he was like, what if I gave you guys a really good deal to do 4 songs? And we're like, okay. So we kept our shit set up in the studio. We're telling him about everything that's going on with Tovar. We showed him the fly, and he's like, oh man. He goes, well, listen, if he lets you out of that contract, I'll manage you guys. And he goes, and you know what? One of the perks is of me managing you guys is I own a recording studio. So you guys can record for free. And all of a sudden we're like, oh my God. Because he had like a real studio. Like it wasn't like a little, like in a closet. It was like he had a real like control room, like a big SST board. And so the day that shit happened with Tovar, boom, Strider's managing us.
Did you guys ever reconcile later on with Tovar? I know he passed away sadly a couple of years ago. Did you guys ever
Yeah,
reconcile down the road as time went on with him?
yeah, we definitely did. And years later, I even apologized to him and I said, look, it was a stupid, like, and I was like, and you know what? You were probably right. We were young, we were new, but we wanted to strike while the fire was hot. We thought what we're doing is happening right now, and record labels are snatching up bands like us. But yeah, I can't say enough about John Tovar and what he did for the scene. He cared so much. Like he poured his life into cultivating new bands. And that's one thing I saw over time is he never stopped. Up until the time of his death, he was still seeking out new bands and cultivating them and showing them how to get better, how to write, how to record, how to be professional. And I think he saw some things in Dore Soul that he wanted to work on and cultivate, but we were just, and even though, like I said, even though we weren't a punk rock band, we had a very punk rock attitude of just like, fuck you. You don't tell us what to do. You don't tell me how to write. Don't tell us what to wear. Don't And that's the difference, is people may not know it and people may not see it, but even with some of these punk bands, quote unquote, sometimes there's somebody in the back telling them, like, don't wear that, wear this. And it's like, how punk can that really be, you know? And while we're on the subject, so now I got a girlfriend, we got an apartment, she's got a roommate, our um and her roommate likes to date guys in bands. And I'd been hearing about this band called Load, but I never had heard them and I never went to see them. And one night we get home from a gig, and there's some shoes under the table. They're like these like leather like shoes with a buckle on. And I'm like, those fucking shoes are badass. They're like really beatnik. Like I was like, and my girlfriend was like, yeah, I can't remember the girl's name, Michelle. She's dating a new guy. Oh, he's the singer of that band Load. Those are his shoes. So we go to bed. We wake up in the morning, and I get up and I'm pouring some cereal, and Bobby comes out of the bedroom. He's like, what's up, bro? I'm Bobby. He's like, can I have some cereal? And I'm like, fuck yeah, man, sit down. And I go, I like those shoes, man. They're badass. And he goes, yeah, man, I got them at Goodwill. They were like $2. And I saw them and I had to have them. And I go, I said, I might steal them from you, man. So he's like, so what do you do? And I'll go, I have a band. And he goes, oh, what's your band? I go, Dore Soul. And he goes, oh, you guys are recording with Strider. And I said, yeah. He goes, that's where we record. And I go, really? I go, you guys record at Gled? And I go, but you guys are like so punk, and he's like a metal dude. He goes, yeah, but we like grew up with Strider. Like we went to like middle school and high school with him, and he gives us a really good deal. And he goes, and he lets us mix it ourselves. And I go, oh my God, that's good, because he tries to put like reverb and like get noise gates, and he tries to use like sampled drums tones, and we're like, yeah, he's still stuck in that hair metal thing. We were like, so then we go to Strider. We're like, hey, can you let us mix it ourselves? Now, why would I do that? I go, because I met Bobby from Load, and he says, he goes, those are paying customers. He goes, I manage you guys. I'm letting you record for free. I'm going to mix it. So now we've heard Load recordings, and we're like, this doesn't sound like it was recorded at Gled. It just sounds like fucking raw. And we're like, that's what we want. We want a dry drum sound. We want the guitars like in your face like that. We don't want all. And Strider's like, you guys aren't a punk band though. And I go, I didn't say we're a punk band, but I mean, come on.
Would he have changed his mind if you were going to be a paying customer at that point? Like, did that ever come up in the conversation?
Well, here's what happened is the Blowjob album, and that was the name of it, was we were still in the honeymoon stage with Strider. So we pushed and pulled and got half of what we wanted. We got him to take most of the samples off of the drums. There was just like where he's just, this drum sounds terrible. Let me just sample that one time. And then we got him to take most of the reverb off. And then we got him to let us record the last 3 songs just live in the studio, because we were like, the less you let him do, the better. Just don't let him. So, and I don't want to talk bad about Strider, because today we're on good terms, but it definitely got rough at the very end. But yeah, so the Blowjob album, we didn't really have the control we wanted. And the way that album was named, we had a good friend of ours, and she was a photography major at University of Illinois. I think she grew up with our bass player, Derek, and she was home for the summer, and she had a portfolio, and she was coming to all our shows and like taking pictures, and we were like, we need a good album cover. And Jimmy was like, we should look at Melissa's portfolio and see if she's got any good pictures. Because she would just take these random pictures that were cool. And we're flipping through, and one of them was an old lady with her hair getting blow dried, and she fell asleep in the newspapers down, and she's like, yeah, that was a like a senior citizens hair salon in South Beach, and she had fallen asleep, and I was just like, I just took the picture, and we were like, that's fucking awesome. And then she's like, you want to see the name of the picture? And she turns it over and it says blowjob. And we were like, that's it. That is going to be the album cover. That's going to be the name of the album. And she goes, oh, you're going to name your album that? And we're like, yeah, why not? So,
Do you have any regrets later with that name?
I mean, I didn't, because the first 500 went, like the first, and then we put them in Uncle Sam's Gone. Like I think the name alone made people go, wait a second, what is this? And then we also, I loved how Dinosaur Jr.'s Green Mind was so, like, the colors of the album were like green and blue, like it was so like clashing, like nothing matched. So that's another thing too, is we wanted it to be like, we didn't want it to be like a congruent, like oh, all the colors match, and it's so I think it served its purpose. I didn't foresee what would happen when it happened. But the first thing that happened is we're about to do our album release party, and one of the kids I work with, I got this idea, because he was like, you know what you guys should do? You should have, like, put up a white sheet and have like a girl giving a guy a blowjob behind the white sheet where you see the, and I was like, that's a fucking great idea. I go, would you and your girlfriend do it? And he's like, yeah, I'll call my girlfriend and we'll do it, man. He was like a burnout, and so he's like, the day before, he's like, we're gonna show up, we're gonna do it. So we have the sheet, we have the string, we have the lights, we have everything ready to go. In that afternoon, he's like, she won't do it. I'm like, oh, man, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, she ain't gonna do it. And he goes, and I got a girlfriend, I can't do it with another girl. And I'm like, fuck. So I'm like, what are we gonna do? And then I'm like, fuck it, me and my girlfriend will do it. So I tell my girlfriend, I'm like, so you got to do this with me. And she's like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm gonna do this. And I go, we're gonna be behind the sheet though. It's gonna be okay. And I don't know if you've ever heard the term stage dick. Like when a porn star, you yell action and they can't get it up. Because like the moment the light goes on. But we're like committed to this, and we're at reunion room packed, fucking packed, and the lights are off, and me and her are like behind the sheet, like getting it going. And as soon as that light goes on, woo, like, yeah, it wasn't happening. It was, and she's like, what do I do? And I'm like, I don't know. And all the guys, I know this is, but it's funny because all of my friends were like, and then they said it looked like she was pulling some Laffy Taffy or something. And I was like, oh my God. And it's funny because Brian Warner was there, because this was our thing. We were like, Manson's the theatrical band, but we're going to beat them at their own game. We're going to do the theatrical. And this was our theatrical. And Brian was there, and he came up to me after. And this is where I heard the term. And he goes, I see you got stage dick. And I go, what do you mean by that? And he goes, it was pretty obvious. And I was like, fuck. So now me and Brian are on speaking terms again, and things are okay. But that pushes him. So the next Manson show, him and his girlfriend Missy, they just do it not even behind a sheet. They just do it right there on stage. And everybody's like, I think Brian won up to you. And I go, well, good for him, because there's no way I would do that. I can't even believe what I did do. But this was, Manson was trying to like up the ante, and then you got Jenna tortures and doing crazy stuff. So, but then the WKPX situation happened, and Mark Del Campo, he didn't even say blowjob. He said jobs that blow, and got suspended for saying jobs that blow on the air. And when he called me and told me, he's like, I got suspended. And I'm like, what? And and somebody recorded it and played it to me. And I was like, but you don't even say the word blowjob. So I go to Piper. I go to the front office, me and Jimmy together, and we ask to speak to the principal. They ask what it's about. We say, the principal comes out, and I think we go to the radio room. The teacher comes out, and we're like, we're here, petitioning for. He's in 10th grade. He's a kid. Like he's a straight A student, like a 4.9 grade point average. Like, and they were like, they couldn't believe that we would come and do that when the name of our album was Blowjob. And they were blown away, and they, no pun intended, and they they took him off his suspension, and it made the Sun Sentinel newspaper. It was like, I want to say it was either like the bottom of the front page, or so that even fueled even more people wanting to know who we were. And then Excess Magazine did a whole article on it, and now by this time, Strider is using all of his connections to shop the Blowjob cassette to labels. And that's when we realized, like, Strider had some real connections. Like, he was getting it into the hands of real labels like Sony, Atlantic, Interscope. And it's funny because right around this time, Matt Kramer quit Saigon Kick because he didn't want to be a love song band. All of a sudden, Saigon Kick has Love Is on the Way. It's a #1 hit single. Matt's mortified that his face and voice are now known as a ballad band. And so he just decides to quit. And one of his good friends was Gary Strider. And if I recall correctly, and I'm still friends with Matt to this day, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, when he quit, he called Strider and said, pick me up from the airport. Jumped on a plane. Strider picked him up from the airport, and he said, I'm going to go in your studio next week and start my own band, start writing. And Strider's like, cool. What are you doing tonight? And he's like, I don't know. What are we doing? He goes, I'm taking you to see the band that I manage, Dore Soul. So he brought Matt to our gig, and Matt was like, oh my God, dude, I fucking love you guys. And he was like, see, I feel like Saigon Kick could have been more like this. And he started saying stuff that we were like, yeah, maybe. But it felt good because Matt was definitely an inspiration for me, never being a front man. And here was this band that, even though they had a lot of hair metal tinges, they were definitely a very unique and different band. They were they were kind of like a speed bump in the road from hair metal to alternative, and it was good to become friends with Matt and hear Matt give us the compliments that he gave us. And sure enough, he puts a band together like that in their Instrider studio. They were called Coma, and I sang all the backup vocals on that. The drummer in that band, Ricky Sanders, now to this day is still one of my best friends. Ricky Sanders was in a hair metal band called Crier that got signed to Atlantic, and right before their album was supposed to be released, Nevermind came out. So Atlantic shelved their album, canceled their deals, sent them home. So Ricky was, what do you call it? He was in the line of fire, so to speak. He was a casualty. But he was like, I knew it. He goes, I knew the whole hair metal thing was done. So he joins the band Naked Rhythm, and years later, Naked Rhythm got a deal with Massacre Records. So, but
Did you guys ever find a late? I know you mentioned that labels were being shopped. Did you whatever happened with finding a label? Did that ever happen? Because I know a year later, the album "The New Shit" came out, which didn't appear to be on a major label or anything like that. So, what was the story behind that?
well, here's what happened. We had Chuck Reed from Interscope Records came to see us. Loved the band, and he was like, I'm ready to sign you guys. The only thing is Jimmy Iovine, whatever, has final say. So no matter even if I say I'm 100%, let's go. If he gives it the thumbs down, that's it. There's nothing I can do about it. And if you know anything about him, Jimmy Iovine is a very kind of like gut feeling, and he gave it the thumbs down. And he's like, that's not saying it's over. We're still going to stay in touch with you guys and watch and see what happens with you, what happens with the industry. Then I think there was a guy at Sony Records. He never came down to see us, but he liked, because here was a thing is that their alternative, I don't know if it ever was defined, because the term alternative rock is so big. Like you can be Green Day or Korn and be considered alternative, and you can be the Gin Blossoms and Matchbox 20 be considered alternative. It's such a wide umbrella. But in 92, 93, it wasn't so defined yet. And since we were influenced by so many different sounds and vibes, like we had a song that could have been a Quit song, the very first song on Blowjob, Shoot the Horse. Then we had a song that, I don't know, could have been I don't want to say Gin Blossoms because it wasn't that jingle jangly, but we had songs that could have been like, a Jane's Addiction song, and then another song could have been a Stonable Pot. Like even though I never sang like, but that was the thing, is this guy he was like, I like these 4 songs. Can you write like 10 more of these songs? I don't like these songs. So if you're like this type of band, I'm interested in coming down. But right now you're kind of all over the map. You're doing songs of all different styles. And at the time I didn't understand it. I thought it was kind of fucked up. I kind of get it now. If you're dealing with a major label, you're a product. They're trying to sell the product. And Frank Zappa said it himself. He's like, people at record labels have no idea. They don't know. They're not musicians. They're not artists. They're just like, hey, let's just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. So this caused a point of contention with the band, because the record label wanted us to get a little bit more poppy. And our guitar player, Jimmy, it's not that he was into pop, it's just that he was going through a phase where he was obsessed with great songwriters. And he was really getting into like early Joe Jackson, early XTC, early Elvis Costello, Squeeze, like that English power pop, the Knack. And like, this is quality songwriting, like the lyrics, the chord progressions. It's not relying on screaming or huge guitars. And then he's like, we need to do more of that. And then our drummer, Gary, is getting into heavier and heavier music. And he's like, dude, look at the bands that are really coming on strong in the scene. Manson, Collapsing Lungs, Load, all heavy. He's like, we need to get heavier. So you got Jimmy wanting to get like poppier, Gary wanting to get heavier. And I'm like, how about we just continue to be who we are and do what we do and fuck them. And if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, at least we know we did what we wanted to do. But that's easy for me to say because I was the primary songwriter. So now they want to have more say so in the songwriting. And even though I still remain the primary songwriter, I found myself trying to create songs that made everybody in the band happy. So the new shit cassette is almost even more like bipolar because there's like 3-4 songs that kind of like are me trying to like appease Jimmy, and then songs to appease. And some of them were just some of our heavier songs that never made it to Blowjob. And I mean, I love it. I love it all because I like so many styles of music. And that cassette, we got what we wanted. I got Strider to get up and go sit in the back and let me sit behind the board and mix it. And he at first he was just like, no, you don't know what you're doing. No, that's not right. No, okay, whatever. And I was like, dude, do me a favor. Go in the other room or something and just give me a little time. And when I tell you to come back in. So he came in the room and he was like, I'm not gonna lie, it sounds great. He goes, he goes, I have nothing to say. It sounds great. And I love the sound of that batch of music because I think the execution of the songs, the performances, the actual songs themselves. And another little tidbit of information is Ricky Sanders' drums were set up in the control room, and Ricky Sanders like a drummer's drummer. Like Ricky is Shinedown's drum tech. So when Shinedown goes on a world tour, Ricky is the right-hand man to their drummer. And if their drummer gets injured, Ricky has to be able to get behind the drums and play all the Shinedown songs. Ricky has been the drum tech for Papa Roach, Matchbox 20, numerous bands. But even back then, like he's just like a student of the instrument and dialing in great sounds, great tones. It's funny because now he tells me that, oh, this is gonna get me in trouble. When Jason Bueller was putting together Saigon Kick, he wanted Ricky to quit Cryer and join Saigon Kick. But Ricky was like, dude, we're about to get a record deal, but you should get this kid, Phil Varone. He's a great drummer. And Ricky even took Phil Varone under his wing and showed him a lot of stuff to be a better drummer, get a better drum tone. But I guess they had some falling out because once Saigon Kick got big and famous, Ricky was backstage at one of their gigs and Phil almost pretended like he didn't know who he was. So
Was the cover art for the new shit, was that in response to what had happened with the Interscope situation? with the prior record?
Eh, I think it was kind of meant like as a joke because at the time it everybody wanted to be controversial in their flyers, especially like Manson and Jack Off Jill. Like their flyers were just so like, whoa. It's funny though, because years later, Marilyn Manson had a hit with the new shit. And I remember Brian loved that cassette. He was like, I loved it. He goes, I love that you called it the new shit. Like so when I turn on MTV one day and there's a new Marilyn Manson song called the new shit, I'm like, that's from our album. But yeah, that was just having fun. And so the end of Dory's Soul was, you remember the local Palooza?
I remember it, yes.
It became the Excess Music Fest, but the first 2 years it was called Local Palooza, and it was the him or she village. At the time, the Revolution was called the Edge, and you had the Poorhouse, Tavern 213, and they would block the streets off, and even venues that didn't have bands would have a bands that night. And so there was like 6 or 7 different venues. You could take a trolley over the water over to Squeeze. They had bands. The first year of Local Palooza, we headlined the main stage inside, and Manson headlined the Squeeze stage. So then the second year, Manson, I think he was like, I want that big stage at the Edge. So they headlined the second year the stage at Revolution, the Edge, and we headlined the Squeeze stage. And that was our last show, because it was to the point where our drummer Gary couldn't, and him and Jimmy wouldn't even speak to each other, because Jimmy would be like, oh, give Gary what he wants. Let's just be heavy. Like, wow. And Jimmy was just like, I'm over it. He goes, if it's a competition to see who's heaviest, Load already won. He's like, it's over. There's no, Load is gonna win when it comes to who is the heaviest. Like, they're gonna win. And we were, by this time, we were huge fans of Load. We played shows with them, and I love Load. And even though it shouldn't be my cup of tea, they obliterated every band, dude. I mean, what is there to say? You either love it or you hate it, and if you love it, it's because you get it, like you understand, like how fucking amazing that band was, and they should have been huge. But yeah, at the time, like it was, and Collapsing Lungs were with their rap metal stuff, like they were like, here was the breaking point. Jason Flom from Atlantic Records, who signed Saigon Kick, signed, ended up in the future signing Matchbox 20, I think, Collective Soul, whatever. Strider got his attention, and Jason Flom was flying in to see us. And this was right when we released the new shit. So we're like, fuck yeah. And Matt Kramer was like, I'm good friends with Jason Flom. I'm gonna come with him to the gig, and I'm gonna put in a good word for you guys. Just you gotta nail it. So the mistake that we made is we're out flying cars one night, and we run into the Collapsing Lung guys, and we tell them, yeah, Jason Flom's coming to see us. Oh, really? What night? Oh, blah, 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 blah. Where you can do the showcase at Squeeze. Oh, cool. bye. And then everybody goes home. The next day or 2 days later, Strider calls us and he's like, who did you tell that Jason Flom's coming down? And we're like, I don't know why. He's like, you told Collapsing Lungs, didn't you? And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, because I got a call from Jason Flom that he wants to see you guys and Collapsing Lungs. And I'm like, okay, so Collapsing Lungs will just go on before us at Squeeze. And he goes, no, because somehow Collapsing Lungs manager was able to convince him to do it at an all ages show at +5, because Collapsing Lungs at +5 all ages shows, they would pack it out. And we're opening for Collapsing Lungs because they had a bigger draw at +5 than we did. So Strider's like, good job. He's like, now I got to pick him up from the airport and bring him to a gig where you guys are going to open for the biggest rap metal band in the area. And we're like, and so it wasn't good because we were what we were. But, you know, that's like, I don't know, how do you say it? That would be like putting on like Stone Temple Pilots going on before Rage Against the Machine. Like, no, they're good over here, but you can't do that. That would, and you know, because we're not like, you know, it goes like that, like smack the crack the jet, like. So they ended up, Jason Flom ended up giving them a developmental deal, and Collapsing Lungs put out an album on Atlantic, and that really put, now we were, because Gary, our drummer's like, see, we should get heavier. And Jimmy's like, you know what? I think Collapsing Lungs is cheesy. Fuck that bullshit. Meanwhile, I'm friends with everybody. I like everything. I'm still to this day friends with Collapsing Lungs. Chris Goldblock was their drummer for that showcase. So, and you know what? More power to him. But it definitely really put the rift. And when we did the local Palooza that night, it was just, nobody's talking to anybody. Like, we're 4 band members who are like brothers, but nobody wants to be in the same room. Nobody wants to talk. And I'm like, you know what? Fuck this. So I remember we came off stage and went backstage at Squeeze, and I think the Goods are over here, the Holy Terrors are over here. We're all in the room together, and right in front of everybody, I go, I'm done. And they're like, what do you mean you're done? I go, I'm done. I go, Dore Soul is done. I go, unless you guys want to go on without me, I can't take this anymore. And Gary's like, fine. And Gary walks out of the room, and then Jimmy walks out of the room. And then I remember, I think like John and Jim Camacho from the Goods came over, and they went, what's going on, man? Slow down. And I think like Rob Elwood, and everybody was like, wait, man, wait. Just, no band should ever break up. Just like, go on hiatus, put a side project together, just do something else. Don't break up. And I'm like, yeah, but this is breaking my heart because these are my friends. And we should be, you know, it shouldn't be this way. So that was it. And
The person that you are today, looking back on a situation like that, you think you would have handled it the same way?
no, because my attitude now is that side projects are good, and there's nothing wrong with side projects. And the thing is if you do a side project, you can do something completely different. And if you're in, you know what I mean? Like, you can, like, you could be like in Load and then turn around and be like in a freaking new wave band, like what Jeff was in Jack Off Jill. I mean, and it's not going to hurt the brand of Load just because he went and played guitar with Jack Off Jill. I mean, yeah, but I didn't see it that way at the time. Like, And the attitude at the time was like, you know, like all for one and one for all, and it's the four of us against the world. And but but it was just it's funny because I tell Jimmy all the time, because oh man, another huge person on the scene that I forgot is Rat Bastard. Rat Bastard was a huge cheerleader for Dore Soul, even though Rat is like hardcore, like in his musical tastes. He had a band called Scraping Teeth that won Spin Magazine's worst band of the year. And he was just proud of that because they went out of their way to sound as gross as they could. But Rat, behind the facade and behind the whole image and everything, he's an extremely smart guy that understands bands and people's tastes and what's cool one week and not cool another week, and then it's cool, like, and and he was always like a champion for the band. And he always told us, get a regional following. He would tell us to make 7-inch, but we're like, only punk bands do that. We're not a punk band. Nobody. And he's like, it doesn't matter. He goes, it gets in the bin right there, and these kids are just snatch them up. They're going to snatch it up. And he's like, get a regional following. And he's like, and I was like, I can't, because Jimmy's we all quit college to do the band 100%. Jimmy's mom said, if you quit college, you can't live at home anymore, and you got to give me your car back. There was a time where I thought about kicking Jimmy out and getting another guitar player that was ready to take it, because Collapsing Lungs, Marilyn Manson, all these bands were doing regional tours. They would go up to Atlanta, even up to North Carolina, like in everywhere in Florida. And we were one of the only bigger bands that wasn't doing that. And so yeah, it's funny because me and Jimmy joke now on it. Sometimes I'm like, man, sometimes I think I should have kicked you out. But a thing about Jimmy is like he's got such a unique guitar style, and anybody that you ask about Dore Soul will say that Jimmy's one of their favorite things about Dore Soul, because he had such a unique approach to the guitar. I always put him in a category with like an Andy Summers or like a Dave Navarro or like the Pixies, what's his name, Santiago, because they're like, even Dan Hosker of the Holy Terrors, they just have this unique thing that they do that is so them that it can't be anybody else. So I think if we would have tried to get another guitar player, it wouldn't have been the same.
Right. So what came after that chapter ended, at least for that moment? Because I know something else came later. But what happened after that?
Well, as soon as we broke up, me and Jimmy continued to talk. I think Gary went back to college, started managing Specs. I think he ended up marrying one of the other Specs managers. So we didn't talk to Gary for a while. And I just wanted to get away from the scene altogether, because at this point, I'd spent 4 straight years, like just my lot. That's all my life was. And it was like, and I was just working whatever type of job to be able to put the band #1 priority. So, and during the time at the end of Dore Soul, me and Jimmy really started to bond over that English power pop. Like I was too young for that when I was like because I was so into like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. But now here I am like embracing like the first two Joe Jackson albums, the first two Elvis Costello, The Police, uh, The Knack, like all I'm just blown away at like how clean and tight and like no cheesy, sappy love songs and ballads, just like get to the point. So the whole batch of songs that became the C60s were, and Jimmy would come over too to the apartment, and even though I was still the primary songwriter because he was finishing up college, he was cramming for his final exams, he had no time. He would still come over and play, and now he's playing like this clean Telecaster tone, but we got all the songs ready to go with a drum machine, and now we're ready to play out. So now I start to get down to Fort Lauderdale and Miami and start to check out, and things have definitely started to change in the scene, I think. But when we were looking for a drummer, and at first we were like, let's not get Gary because he's not gonna like this music. And second of all, it's a completely different style of drumming, and maybe we should find somebody who this is their forte. So we started auditioning drummers, and we had the same problem we had looking for singers. Every drummer was either a metal drummer or a punk drummer, or they didn't get it, like what we were doing. They were like, I don't get it, you know? And so we were like, all right, what are we going to do? So we ended up calling Gary, and we were like, we're gonna give you this tape and tell us what you think. And he loved it. And I was like, don't just say that. And then he was very apologetic. He was like, look, I was wrong. I should have never like pushed. And him and Jimmy hugged and made up, and it was a very happy moment. And then he was like, look, I'm on board 100%. The more I listen to this stuff, the more I love it. I'm ready to do it. And another thing that we had, one thing we loved about Load is that most bands would take forever to get ready when you're doing the band changeover. Like, you have to get all your stuff off stage, and the other band comes up, then they do a little sound. Load would literally just throw their shit on stage and go, all right, we're ready. And we wanted to be that type of band. We were like, I don't want to be like heavy like Load, but I want to be able to just go 2 amps, drum set, we're ready, let's go. And that's what the C60s were. Like, we had it dialed in to where, and we had that energy, like we had that punk energy where it was like, but we weren't punk.
You could feel that through the album that came out, the self-titled record from 1998. You could hear that punk energy come through, even though, to your point, Carey, it was not a punk band, but it had a little bit of those ethos in the sound, and maybe that was just because of some of the influences or what you all may have been into as well. But it did come out though in the sound a
Yeah.
little bit.
And the funny thing about it is we still had all of our connections, and the guy who managed Squeeze and booked the bands at Squeeze, Adam Matza. Adam Matza was also very good friends of ours in Dore Soul. He had a spoken word like beat poetry group called the Baboons, and they would like dress up like they were like a tribe from like, and do these spoken word beat poet stuff. And but he also wrote for Excess Magazine. He did several articles on Dore Soul. But we became like personal friends, so we stayed in touch. And now he was booking the bands at Squeeze, and he was like, when are you guys going to be ready for your first show? And I said, I think we're ready now, or we've been in the warehouse. And he's like, well, have you ever heard of this band Self? And I had just heard Self like at 3 a.m. on Zeta one night. And I was like, that's an interesting song. And he's like, well, this band Self is I'm getting national acts now. And if you want, you can open for them. So I went out and bought the album, and I was kind of blown away at how different and unique they were. And the more I read the jacket, the more I realize they're like a Nine Inch Nails. It's one guy who's doing everything, and then he hires a band to. And Matt Mahaffey was the brainchild of Self. He's an unbelievable multi-instrumentalist. He plays everything. He engineers, produces, he does it all. And so we got an opportunity to open for them. We weren't thinking anything of it because we hadn't even got our first show under our belt. But during sound check, the band manager and Matt came off of the tour bus and came inside. And right away, he comes over and he's like, whoa, you guys are fucking awesome. And he's like, he goes, I want to get you guys signed to our label. And we're like, okay. And he's like, do you have a demo tape? And we go, we haven't even played our first show yet. I said, the only demo tape I have is with drum machines. And he goes, do me a favor. Next rehearsal, record your rehearsal with a boombox and send me the tape. He's like, because you guys rip shit off walls. Those were, because I remember his exact words, you guys rip shit off walls. And so we were like, holy shit, because Sponge Bath Records was an imprint of Enclave Records, which was Tom Zutaut, who signed Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses. So now Tom Zutaut's a legend in the industry. DreamWorks Records is a brand new record label, and they give Tom Zutaut his own imprint called Enclave Records. And they give him a few $1 million every year to sign and cultivate bands. So he gives Matt Mahaffey his own little indie imprint, kind of like Nothing Records for Nine Inch Nails. His label was called Sponge Bath. And so now Matt kind of has signing power. He just has to, once again, get them the okay from the higher ups. So we send him the cassette. He calls us while they're on the tour bus. He loves it. He's like, we're going to get you guys signed. That took a good year for them to put the contract together, for them to like and then we got a real attorney, because now we've got like a real contract. So we get Alan Jacoby. Alan Jacoby has negotiated deals from Marilyn Manson to Saigon Kick to the Mavericks, Nuclear Valdez, the Bee Gees, Earth, Wind, and Fire. Like if you're going to get an entertainment lawyer in South Florida, you get Alan Jacoby. So he negotiated. So finally we pinned the deal and we're ready to record. And up until that point, we had recorded some demos at Studio 13 with Jeremy, because we always loved Jeremy's recordings. And if anybody doesn't know Jeremy Staska, Poison the Well has an iconic album that was recorded there. The first Manson demos, Radio Baghdad, the EP that Newfound Glory put out before their first album of covers from movies or whatever, that was recorded. Jeremy, I can't say enough about Jeremy. He's definitely someone you should interview. So we recorded the demos there, and now we're ready to go in the studio. So we said we want to record at Criteria, but it's going to be way too expensive. We only had a $35,000 budget. So we were like, but what if we recorded live? Then we'd have enough money, because we just blast it out live, mix it down, get out of there. And we want to bring Jeremy with us to Criteria. And Jeremy's like, oh my God. He goes, I've always wanted to record at Criteria. They have this one-of-kind Neve console that I've always wanted to record on. So he got to check something off his bucket list. He finally got to record at Criteria instead of his little warehouse in Deerfield on the Neve board. And him and Matt Mahaffey became good buddies because they have what like the 4-foot long bong and they're just smoking away. But that was a very good time. We recorded 13 songs in 13 hours.
Wow.
One day, totally live. And then I recorded my vocals in 4 5-hour sessions, and we mixed down in 2 12-hour sessions, and we were right at like 35,000. And it was just like it was very cool to. And we got to use all 3 rooms, because one room to lay the tracks down, one room. I recorded my vocals with Julio Iglesias's microphone. And then the mix down room, it was legendary because I guess Black Sabbath mixed down Never Say Die in that room. And there was still like things like carved like in the wall from them and stuff. And it was,
Right.
it still smelled like cigarette smoke or something.
These are the kind of stories though you hear from other people when they record at places like Capitol or Muscle Shoals, or just those, those world-renowned studios. And I guess when you think about Florida, Criteria was that studio where you would have stories like that, because they did have those legendary albums recorded at Criteria. So
yeah, and I mean, and I can still say that we recorded in it. I think it was called the Hit Factory at the time, but
you mentioned. Sorry, I want to ask you real quick, because you mentioned when we're talking about Dore Soul, you guys didn't really tour, and that was something that you kind of wish you would have maybe gotten more around regionally. Did the C60s ever tour? Did that change with that band?
the C60s, the plan was to tour massively, but right before our album came out, I think Enclave split with DreamWorks Records. So now Enclave was a major label, but didn't have the same amount of money and didn't have international distribution. They only had national distribution. So all of a sudden, what was supposed to be a really good record deal was now like it's not going to be international distribution. The budget's not there. So then when it came time to book our tour, the Enclave parted ways with Sponge Bath. So now Sponge Bath still has the budget from the year before. I think it was like $1 million to split with 6 bands. So now 6 bands have to share all of that. So how much do we get? We're the newest band. It kind of sucked, because it all of a sudden you thought you were going to be shooting with a cannon, and now you're shooting with a pistol, and now you're shooting with a BB gun. Like it's not going to have the same effect. And what really sucked was when it first got released, it was marketed towards college towns, because it's very much like a college rock, indie rock. But we started to chart on the college music charts. We charted number 6 on the CMJ. And in the cities that we did the best in were Austin, Chicago, LA, Seattle, Boston, like all the top college towns. All the tastemaker college towns loved us. Now, can we get there? Because the smart thing to do would be to go to all of those towns where you're doing the best, where you're getting the most airplay. But now we didn't have enough of a budget, so we could only tour so much. And that kind of sucked. I mean, I think we had enough money. And here's another thing too, the label, because I think the the guy that was helping Matt do the business side of Sponge Bath Records was a little crooked. And we found that out years later. Like he was spending the label's money on his own personal stuff. Like we went, Sponge Bath is based out of Nashville. We went to Nashville to do a label showcase, and he had just bought a brand new house and a brand new car. And we're like, where's he getting the money to do this? Duh. So the C60s, we had a manager who was one of our best friends from middle school and high school, grew up in Shaker Village, was like a brother to us. And he was our buddy who went to University of Alabama and used to send us the college radio stuff, Charlie. And he's the whole time Dore Soul was a band, he was just reading about the industry. So he was like, look, let me manage you guys and I will make shit happen. So I do have to give Charlie a lot of credit for what did happen with the C60s, because he represented us good and he made smart decisions on the band behalf. And the fact that he was one of us, he was like the fourth member of the band. He was a brother to us. Him and Jimmy grew up in Shaker Village since they were 6, 7 years old, like playing in the, but the label was not releasing the money for touring, but it was in the contract that they had to give us a certain amount. So Charlie maxed his credit cards out to fund the tour with saying, you guys are going to give me the money, because if you don't, I've got a contract here and I'll take action. So even though Matt Mahaffey wasn't happy with what was going on, it wasn't his fault. We did everything we could. We toured for 3 months. I think we got as far up as Philadelphia. We can't remember. I think we played like Athens, Georgia, Atlanta, South Carolina, North Carolina. And it was mostly like little punk rock clubs with a couple of local bands. There was a couple of times that we got to do like bigger shows. We got to do Zeta Fest with I think the year Faith No More and Better Than Ezra were headlining. But yeah, it wasn't a huge amount of touring. And by this time, Jimmy was ready to wind down too. Like he had graduated and was working in his field, and he met a girl, and we were so disheartened by what happened with the label, just from going from DreamWorks to Enclave to Sponge Bath to, oh, by the way, there's no record deal at all anymore.
Right.
And what we didn't realize is behind the scenes, it was Napster. Because once Napster hit, it ruined record labels. And record labels saw overnight that you couldn't make money the way you used to. So that's when they started dumping labels. And that's when Sony and Universal ended up just buying up every label. DreamWorks Records like folded. So now in retrospect, I look at it and we were just a victim of the downsizing of the music industry.
I want to quickly just go back to when the C60s played Zeta Fest. Was that the first time that the band played an outdoor festival like that?
I don't think we played any other really big festivals like that.
What was that experience like, considering that that was the only time that that had happened?
I mean, the response was great. I mean, we definitely were different because we were definitely like a college rock sounding band. We weren't like a Better Than Ezra or a Faith No More, but I mean, but our energy and like could win you over. And it was a great show. I mean, the crowd loved us. And we had a lot of people from that knew who we were.
Right.
And another thing too is we had our video got played like at 2 in the morning on MTV2, and we
Remote
got,
control.
yeah, we got played on the box, which was the call-in 99
Right.
cents. We actually, for a few days, we were like the #1 requested song on the box, and everybody was like, how many times are you guys calling in? And we're like, we're
Right.
doing it.
Was there any pay for that?
No. Yeah, they're charging 99 cents for every call, but the band doesn't see any of it. It's funny because when because at the time I was waiting tables at Cheesecake Factory in Boca, and I go to greet a table one night, and it's like a family, and their teenage daughter goes, "Aren't you the singer of the C60s?" And I'm like, and she goes, "Oh my God, I love your video. I request it on the box all the time." And I'm like, and she's like, wants to get my autograph. And I'm like, okay, but first I need to get your drink order
Right.
and like an appetizer to start off. It was like really like, what the fuck?
Yeah. I mean, the box had a lot of reach. I mean, it was very, very popular at that time. And
I'll tell you another funny little story is there was a band that used to open for the C60s all the time called the Vacant Andes. And we became good buddies with the Vacant Andes. And one of their singer guitar players' name was Chris Caraba, and Dan Brombrake was their bass player. And they put a little side project together called Dashboard Confessionals, and the rest is history. But I remember Chris Caraba, 18, 19 years old, and he was always like, man, you guys are like my favorite band because you take your songwriting seriously and it's so good. And he would always be like, man, he goes, I have the CD. I didn't even open it out of the cellophane. I have the sticker and the shirt. And years later, now I'm waiting tables at like J. Alexander's in Boca. And all of a sudden I see Chris at the hostess stand. I'm like, holy shit. And he sits in my section with his mom. And he's like, what's up, man? I go, how you doing? I go, you obviously are doing good. And he introduces me to his mom. He's like, this is one of the best songwriters I've ever met. And that kind of made my night. Because once again, I need to get your drink order and your appetite. But thank you. But that kind of goes hand in hand with I want to say a little bit of a VH1 behind the music moment when we lost our record deal, we lost our funding. I was heartbroken, and I feel like I almost wasted 10 years of putting my blood, sweat, and tears, heart and soul into music, and because of record labels and business and things like that, not because we didn't give it everything we've got, not that we weren't good enough, but it started to just sink in like, wow, this may not happen. And in retrospect, it should have been a moment for me to regroup and then go in with either a new idea or maybe a new thing, like become a songwriter in the industry. But I crashed and burned. I went through, I'd say, a good 4 or 5 years of like depression and medicating, shall we say, and a very hard time. And I can honestly say, there's a lot of my friends who we all know well, Jeff from Load, Bobby, Dan Hosker. There's a lot of guys who didn't make it through. And I could have been one of those. And one day I woke up and got my head out of my ass and went, wait, If you don't stop, you're going to either end up in jail, dead, or homeless. I mean, so
And
yeah,
it's good to hear that you turned things around. And how are you feeling today?
great. I, I'm, things have changed a lot. Um, I, I used to make fun of cover bands. I used to say cover bands are the cheesiest thing, the worst thing. I'll never be in a cover band. And I am a full-time musician that plays covers like 7 days a week. And you know what? I make really good money. I do what comes easy to me. I don't have to get up at 6 in the morning and go sit in an office. I don't have a boss breathing down my neck. Um, I'm very grateful and fortunate to live the life that I live. And I mean, I'm 55. I don't feel a day over 35, you know.
Okay, well, that's good.
When you look at the bands from South Florida that got any notoriety at all, it's a small handful of bands. And for us to be in that category is, and I have a body of work that I'm very proud of. The Dore Soul catalog was bought by a record label in 2019 called Fervor Records. And Fervor Records buys the catalog of bands that haven't ever been signed, and they place the songs in like commercials, video games, movies, commercials. So if you go to the Fervor Records website, you'll see bands from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and these are all local bands that never had a record deal. And if they're making a movie and they're like, we need something that sounds like it was from 1962. We have something from night. So there's a series on, I think it was on Netflix or Peacock, called Yellow Jackets. And it's about these girls who were like on a soccer team and they did something horrible in high school,
Right.
and now they're grown adults, and the secrets are coming out to this horrible thing they did. So it constantly goes back to 1992 and then to the present. And there's a scene in the show where they're getting all ready to go out, and it's 1992, and they needed a song, and one of our songs, one of the Dore Soul songs, is the song "What If," is playing in the background on that TV show. And the funny thing about it is, it's the only free episode. If you watch the free episode and you like it, you have to pay for the rest of the episodes. So it gets watched constantly.
Right.
So every quarter I get a check. And then if you watch the free episode on YouTube, as soon as the episode's done, it has a playlist that automatically plays of all the songs in that episode. And so then our song gets played again on YouTube. So that's kind of cool. I
That
mean,
is
that,
cool. Did the other band members ever share any of their thoughts on that happening?
yeah, I mean, we all had to sign the contract together because they bought the mechanical rights to both of the Dore Soul cassettes. They also remastered it, so it sounds amazing. If you listen to any of the Dore Soul stuff on any platforms, it sounds like it could have been recorded last week. But everybody's very happy because, now we have like kids we can show it to, and we can reminisce and be like, hey, who would have ever thought that this little thing we did back in 1992 would be, played as much as it is. And But yeah, everybody's overjoyed. I mean, just to have something like that happen.
Right.
They wanted to do the same thing with the C60s, but the C60s was not an unsigned band. We actually did have a deal, and we couldn't contact the guy that ran Sponge Bath. That's another way I kind of knew that he'd been doing some stuff, because when I started to try to track him down, people were like, "Oh, I think he went in hiding. Like he owes the
Oh,
IRS."
wow. Okay.
So I think we are all our gut instincts of this guy. He definitely was spending money that should have gone to bands.
Sure. You also did a reunion with Dory's Soul, right?
We did several reunions, because before Churchill's closed, there was a lot of shows. They like first there was the Dan Hosker Music Continuum every year. Then there was a fundraiser for Scott from Manson to raise money for his cancer treatment. Um, then I think there was a tribute to Load, and so there was a lot of opportunities. I did a couple where it was just me, and I just got like a drummer and a guitar player, and then we did a couple. I think we did one of the Dan Hosker Music Continuums, and then another was, I don't know if you know Renee Alvarez from the band Forget the Name and 60.
Yeah.
It was his birthday party. He had his birthday party at Churchill's, which the Rat Opera. I don't know if people know, but Rob Elba and Brian Franklin wrote an opera for Rat Bastard called Hearing Damage. And
Brian Franklin was a guest this year. Talked a lot about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
good guy, good friend. But Renee Alvarez plays Rat Bastard in the opera. And I play Robert Pollard, the singer of Guided by Voices, because I come to Renee in his dreams. So the whole opera is on YouTube. But I gotta hand it to Rob Elba and Brian Franklin, the songwriting, the script, the whole thing. But it was great because it brought together a lot of people on the scene. Andre Serafini was the drummer, and but yeah, that was the rehearsals for that were awesome, and we did several performances at a theater in Fort Lauderdale. But yeah, that was like a family reunion,
Right.
just to have everybody together like that.
Oh, I bet. And thinking about reunions this year, as part of the Dan Hosker Music Continuum, is all about reunions. Is there a possibility we could see a Dory Soul or a C60s reunion?
Yeah, definitely. December 8th at Tarpon River Brewing Company in downtown Fort Lauderdale. Dory Soul will be doing a reunion at the Dan Hosker Music Continuum. And I believe Quit is also going to be doing a reunion that day. I think Livid Kittens. I'm not sure the rest of the bands, but yeah, we're looking forward to it. I would say that's going to be the last one we did before that was about 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So we're looking forward to it. We got to show Quit up, I mean, can't let them steal the thunder.
What's one of your favorite Dory Soul songs to play out?
I really like Foolin' You. Foolin' You is one of my favorites. I would say What If, the song that's in Yellow Jackets, only because it's just, for some reason, everybody loves that song. And we are probably going to do a couple of C60 songs. And as much as I'm over remote control, people love that song. So, and the video is on YouTube. So,
Right. We need
which really quick, the video was filmed all on location in South Beach by University of Miami filmography students. Their final exam for the year, each of them got to make a video, and everybody in the class has to work on the other person's video. So there was, I think, like 20 people in the class. And so if this one guy makes a video, he has 19 people that were working for him. And they get to use all of the equipment from the college. So they have like the box truck with the train tracks, the cameras, the lights, the everything. So it was a totally professional video shoot. And all we had to pay for was the canister of film and the makeup girl. I mean, it could have easily been like a $200,000 video, and it was $5,500, $5,000 for the film.
Right
now, you don't even have film, and in the makeup girl, but the scenes, the cafe scenes were at a little cafe on Lincoln Road. There's a antique store that there was a scene there. There's an apartment that was like 2 blocks away. And apparently it's an apartment that's been used in several movies. And we kept it all in Miami.
You did.
The album was recorded in Miami. The videos recorded in Miami.
You definitely...
Maybe Miami band. I don't know.
I mean, Fort Lauderdale, Miami. I mean, it's depending on traffic, it's not that bad of a drive, but traffic can definitely make it feel that way. So but it's been great chatting with you, Carey, and I really appreciate you taking a trip down memory lane, really going through your career and all the things you've contributed to the South Florida music scene. And I'm sure for the Dan Hosker Music Continuum, getting a chance to see Dore and also hearing some C60s songs as well. Sounds like a lot of fun, and it's just been great chatting with you. So as we get ready to close things out, I'd love to get you the last word. Any final thoughts you'd like to share to viewers and listeners out there? The floor is yours.
If I have any final thing to say, it's I love what you're doing, because I've watched a lot of your videos, and you're setting something in stone and like a time capsule like this. These are going to be videos that anybody's going to be able to watch, and like, no matter how much time goes by, if anybody wants to ever get an idea of what the scene was like, and the diversity of the scene, and just the fact that you care enough and have an interest enough to take the time to do these interviews, and especially the different styles, because you're doing a lot of, and you're a rock star, man. I'm a fan. Thank you.